All right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they are living in a modern day spiritual paradise. And I can assure you, you can survive paradise. I did. I'm your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and most importantly, a kid that was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the 70s and 80s. As we do, just a warning, some of this stuff gets serious, some of this stuff triggers people, and we have nothing but respect and lots of hugs to hand out for those that are triggered. But be warned, some of this stuff can get into territory that can be very emotional, and any sarcasm, humor, and more is just all me, never meant to offend. Okay, my friends, we are about to go down the deep rabbit hole of Jehovah's Witness culture, at least in my opinion. This is one of those ever-evolving things that has had a dramatic effect on God's organization over, in my opinion, particularly the last 40 to 50 years. Take a journey with me this week into the world of marriage, separation, and remarriage, and how Jehovah's Witnesses are using loophole after loophole to get out of a lifetime of misery and then returning to the kingdom hall anyway in just a short period of time. That's right, marriage is an interesting subject among Jehovah's Witnesses, and with marriage comes all the things that surrounds it. The problems you might have, how you deal with them, how you navigate them, who gets involved, all that good stuff, and how it ends up impacting the life of a Jehovah's Witness. And to get it out of the way right now, I can speak to this as someone who married people as an elder. I am also divorced as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And then, of course, in that time as an elder, I got to see lots of stuff that I hope to share, at least from my perspective. It's no secret to most listening that the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses wants to control everything a person does. And it goes beyond actions. They want your thoughts. They want your motives. This is very evident in all things relationships inside their buildings with no windows. Your relationships as a witness aren't your own. Your relationships are theirs. And for decades, they've gone out of their way to remind you that they have a great deal of control over the most intimate aspects of your life. Nowhere is this more evident than in all things marriage in Jehovah's Witnesses. If you don't want to face life-altering repercussions, that is, the governing body holds on to your relationship, and the hold that they have on that relationship begins with engagement. In reality, let me back up. It goes well before that. It involves your dating. The second you develop a crush, and anybody else may know about it, or an interest in another person. But it certainly begins at engagement, where you're not allowed to break one without a judicial committee, but it continues on into your honeymoon and how you might touch each other when you finally get naked together and celebrate your love. And it includes everything, and I do mean everything thereafter. Gone is free will to decide who you marry on the planet. Gone is romance and some of the things that come with that, including lots of touching. Gone is touching each other the way you want to once you're in a committed relationship. Gone is your view on children. Your view will be their view. And gone is your free will to decide if a relationship, including marriage, should end at any point, including how it will end, including why it will end, or even more importantly, how you will move on with your life if you ever do find yourself separating or divorcing as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. When you consider how important it is to the governing body to capture new Jehovah's Witnesses by means of the family arrangement, that means making babies who they can then turn into publishers in their empire, They have a vested interest in keeping people together and pumping out publishers to push their message to everyone on the planet. With all that said, they've had a lot to say regarding the most intimate relationship of all, arguably, which is marriage, most of which is not found anywhere in the Bible aside from Jesus' words on marriage to the Jews during his part-time visit a few years back. I'm not going to bog this down with details on what commitment means. We all have our own perspective, at least I hope we do, because that's our right as people. But it's accurate to say that Jehovah's Witnesses claim marriage is sacred. And by the way, I agree. I agree, no matter what form that takes in a marriage or a commitment or a partnership. I'm a hopeless romantic. I very much believe in that. Any promise made to another person should be upheld. It should be protected. However, again, it's no secret that the governing body claims that being a Jehovah's Witness greatly improves marriage, and that marriage among Jehovah's Witnesses is lollipops and rainbows. Love, romance, and commitment is alive and well in today's spiritual paradise that you can only be in if you're a Jehovah's Witness. But listen, folks, I'm here to ask, would it shock you to know that their claims are not true? That they're dishonest? Or in the very least, heavily weighted in their favor? Marriage in Jehovah's Witnesses doesn't always have a happy ending. I'm living proof of it. And by the way, many are living proof of it. In fact, even in the religion, the organization, the divorce rate is climbing. Some would even claim that it's climbing rapidly, and it's hard to get your arms around it, but you can see it in congregations. Going back just to take a look at the secular information, in a study from 2008, which is, of course, 15 years ago, in a study entitled U.S. Religious Landscape Survey of 2008 by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, they surveyed 35,000 people, and it presented findings on divorce and separation rates. The graph from the report shows that the Jehovah's Witness rate of 14% for divorce was slightly above the U.S. average of 12%. Leading many people to wonder, how can the happiest people on earth, who alone have God's Holy Spirit, be dumping their spouses at such an alarming rate? 14%. And I'm sure many would back this up with observations from their own congregations. Divorce is on the rise in paradise. And let me tell you something, it has been for decades. This is a trend. And aside from all the secular ways to measure that, of which all the control mechanisms and all the what's, here's, why's, it's hard to get your arms around it. But it isn't at the congregation level, where you can see this happening at a very alarming rate among God's people. I grew up in the 1970s and the 1980s, and let me tell you, just going back for a few minutes, divorce was not a thing. It just was not a thing, at least in the 70s, certainly not in the 60s, where I was a very little guy. In fact, if someone separated or divorced, let me tell you what, it was the scandal of the century in a congregation. It was a heavy-duty scandal, and it extended way beyond your local congregation, and it got out into the circuit and the district, and man, it was something else. It just was not common. And in reality, it should have been. As many people during that time period stayed in abusive marriages because the organization told them, that's right, God's guys, that they had to stay in such a relationship. And let me tell you, that subject alone deserves its own episode. We'll get there at some point. But people simply didn't get divorced back in the day when I was a kid. And let me tell you what, you could see the unhappiness all over their faces. But just as worldwide culture changes, This dynamic started to change in the paradise world of Jehovah's Witnesses in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. The rate of divorce began to increase. And with each of these scandalous divorces, it started to lose its edge. People got bored with it. It wasn't headline news anymore. And dare I say it, it has become acceptable, at least from my observation, in many ways within Kingdom Halls. Young marriages began to implode without the very dark stigma that haunted past generations of miserable marriages. From the people I personally grew up with in the 1980s, including myself, almost all of those people in my peer group or in my age group have been divorced now, and were divorced within a few years of their biblical marriage inside a Kingdom Hall. And let me tell you, at the risk of sounding like a narcissist, or maybe just why would anyone be interested, I myself was divorced and remained an elder. And it's a subject for an entire episode if anyone thinks that might be interesting. But there were so many separations during my time. There was so much cheating and adultery. And there were so many divorces that I personally have lost count. But if I think back to the teenage group of people, and let me tell you, witnesses get married as teenagers. It's pretty common. They want to have sex, and it's the only way. Most of the people in that peer group have been divorced. And in an uncanny twist of this entire thing, some of those people even swapped mates and are still Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're back to handing out watchtowers in your neighborhood again. My generation stopped fearing the repercussions, and it just became common. Divorce started and has become a big, it's a big shrug now inside this organization. And that is a huge difference in the Jehovah's Witness culture from my time as a kid, where people cheated, people wife swapped, an entire congregation in California, the servants were wife swapping, and a whole bunch more, but they then stayed together and married anyway. And they did it for Jehovah, because as anyone listening to the show likely knows, Jehovah hates a divorcing. So despite all the scandal and all the lying and all the cheating and sometimes all the abuse, they stayed together anyway when I was a kid, and that began to rapidly change. What this has created is a world where many can't stand each other. They raise kids in that environment where the relationship is strained or destroyed, but they stay together, and they perpetuate the cycle, encouraging their kids when they grow to maybe the right mature age of 18 years old to themselves get married so that, if they want to touch a boy or girl, it's all legal and they won't be disfellowshipped. As marriage started to change and separation and divorce was becoming a more common event, the governing body went on a rampage to convince the world that marriage was sacred and separation and divorce was bad, very bad, even if it was justified, as we will find out. And we're going to roll out what it is that they say is justified according to Jesus' guys in matters of divorce and separation. And so, to begin, looking back at their all-holy information, let's start in the book. A scripture that most Jehovah's Witnesses, if they've been raised around it for any amount of time, will recognize. Malachi chapter 2, verses 14 through 16, in their highly doctored New World Translation, which reads, quote, "It is because Jehovah has acted as a witness between you and the wife of your youth, with whom you have dealt treacherously, although she is your partner and your wife by covenant. But there was one who did not do it, for he had what remained of the Spirit. And what was that one seeking? The offspring of God. So guard yourselves, respecting your spirit, and do not deal treacherously with the wife of your youth, for I hate divorce, says Jehovah, the God of Israel." End quote. And look, without diving into the eschatology or context for the most part, Jehovah was mad at the Jewish guys because they were dumping their older wives and chasing younger girls. By the way, a spirit and part of the culture that is alive and well in the kingdom halls of Jehovah's Witnesses between brothers, sisters, and younger women. It's still happening. But Jehovah said he hates a divorce. From their website, What Does God Require of Us? Lesson 8, page 16, Family Life That Pleases God. He reiterates here, or rather, should I say his 9 guys do, quote, Jehovah hates it when people get divorced without scriptural grounds and marry someone else, end quote. Thanks for the disclaimer. There it is, folks. There are loopholes. In that warm and fuzzy relationship that you started based on love and desire, Jehovah hates it if you get together and you get divorced without one of his loopholes, according to the governing body. I'm going to save you the endless Watchtower articles that support that comment. There were zillions of these, zillions of pages of publications, and they continue to this day to pump out videos, books, and magazines encouraging marriage within Jehovah's Witnesses. A person can search this easily on Jesus' website if they like. It's all there. So I'm going to keep it to a minimum. But note, if you got married at 18 so you could experience sex with someone, or even with the best intentions, you are locked in for life. You're locked in as a witness. There is no exit plan, ever. I want to make sure that that's understood, and that's certainly true of Christianity. I think that's true of even good people, right? We commit to someone we love and we want, and we know it won't always be easy, but you're locked in. Especially if you're a witness, it takes on a different edge. Because if you decide to break the lock, trouble ensues in your life if you're a Jehovah's Witness. Whether you find all that right or wrong is up to each of us. I recognize that. I, too, personally, for those that know me, put great weight on commitment. Good, bad, ugly, love and commitment are very important. But I don't do it the same way these guys in New York do. Let's take a look at a few details surrounding marriage, separation, and divorce as they tell 8 million plus Jehovah's Witnesses today. And I'm going to get it out of the way early. There is only one thing that breaks up a marriage according to Jesus guys in New York and the book that they claim they know better than everyone else. And as you might imagine, it involves sex. That's right, sex. I know you're shocked. They don't have anything to say about sex, right? They're not obsessed with it on any level. Needless to say, the one thing that breaks up a marriage, kind of teasing here, is sex. Under the frequently asked questions section on how do Jehovah's Witnesses view divorce, currently available on his website, we get this, quote, we adhere to the Bible's view of marriage and divorce. God created marriage to be a permanent union between a man and a woman. I'm not going to even say it. Back to the quote. The only scriptural ground for divorce is sexual immorality. End quote. Can't go a few minutes in God's spiritual paradise without discussing sex. Sex with someone else other than your mate, the person you've married. And look, again, I personally am not here condoning having sex with someone else when you're in a committed relationship. Not even close, but there it is. And I want to call this out. A statement like this leaves out a few details. It just says sexual immorality is the only thing that breaks a marriage. Let me tell you right now, it does not. But in the way these 9 guys like to preach it to their people within the confines of the Kingdom Hall walls, they want you to believe it is. But there's something left out of this statement. Sexual immorality is the only way a Jehovah's Witness can get divorce and be allowed to remarry or have another relationship. Kind of a big deal. You can have a miserable relationship There may even be verbal or physical abuse. And if you divorce that person, and let me tell you, you can, you're now, however, commanded to spend the rest of your life alone, single, with no chance to remarry. That's right. Despite leaving for safety reasons, that other mate didn't get naked with someone. Therefore, you're still married to them in the eyes of Jehovah. Therefore, enjoy your celibate, lonely life forever. I won't get into the resurrection hope and dying before and after. I mean forever. Only sex ends the marriage and allows a Jehovah's Witness to move on with their life and have another relationship. Only sex. You could take a beating. You could be ripped off blind. You could be abandoned. There's all kinds of other things. But the loopholes begin. You cannot ever have another romantic relationship again unless one of the parties drops their drawers and gets with someone else. For a Jehovah's Witness, that is the only ending they can hope for. That one of these two people who decided they don't like each other and even have good reasons to not continue the relationship messes up and they can divorce and remarry someone else. I saw this many times ad nauseum, including fellow elders who went out knowing this loophole, committed adultery, got disfellowshipped, sat in the back of the kingdom hall for a year, then got reinstated, and him and his new wife, at times, oftentimes, another sister from the same congregation, and they both just carried on. And wouldn't you guess it, the innocent wife who was cheated on? She too, at times, was sitting in the same congregation, alone, watching all of this. Not kidding. I have buckets of tears that I could share. And in recent times, here it is, and I still can't wrap my head around it, but I'm going to let you figure it out. There was some sort of what they called new light. Ah, yes, new light, of which I still, again, don't understand. I've always seen it this way, what I'm about to read, as has anyone that loopholed their marriage to freedom that was, and this little piece of information was rolled out to Jehovah's Witnesses in the Watchtower of 2022, April, page 30, under one of my favorite sections, Questions from the Readers. In summary, it says this, quote, if a Christian divorces his wife without scriptural grounds and then marries another person, how does the congregation view the previous marriage and the new marriage? End quote for a moment. Note, this intimate relationship that's built on romance between two people isn't just between two people, and it never is in Jehovah's Witnesses. We have a question about how everyone else in the congregation who isn't in the marriage, doesn't live with them, doesn't have the same bank account or anything else. Well, how do they view it? Welcome to marriage and love in Jehovah's Witnesses. Back to the quote. In such a situation, the congregation would view the previous marriage as having ended when the man remarried and would view the new marriage as binding. End quote. And there you have it. In other words, mission accomplished. And I saw this. I'm thinking of names in my head right now. In other words, I dumped my original spouse. I chased the one I wanted to be with. I patiently sat in the back row of the Kingdom Hall. I got reinstated, yay me, and behold, me and my new spouse. We're now faithful Jehovah's Witnesses. The former spouse is destroyed, probably for life, especially if they're older. Isn't this great? Thank you for clearing that up, governing body. The congregation can safely view the first marriage that was destroyed as a no-brainer. It's over. The new marriage should be honored. No matter how you feel about all of this, it is highly messed up and cruel. And I'm sure it's not unique to Jehovah's Witnesses. Look, I know that, but that's the subject of this crazy show. And as I mentioned, The organization is there. There's the organization in your relationship, your marriage, to police all of it. Every decision, good and bad. From that same frequently asked questions section currently available on Jesus' website, we are asked, do congregation elders have to approve the divorce of a witness? That question alone gives you insight into how witnesses think about the body of elders. There's some all-powerful unit that now needs to make a comment about your current relationship. I'm sorry, it's so insane. But here's the answer, quote, no. Even when elders are asked to help a couple deal with marital difficulties, they are not authorized to tell the couple what to do. However, someone who chooses to divorce without scriptural grounds, getting naked with another person, is not scripturally free to remarry. End quote. And there it is. There it is. If you divorce someone on any grounds, you're getting the snot beat out of you. There's any number of other crimes, embezzled all your funds and disappeared, anything else that might happen. The governing body and the elders within Jehovah's Witnesses are watching you. And if you choose to chase another person or get romantically involved with someone, and you don't have the grounds to remarry from the other disappearing spouse or whatever they might be, the elders and the governing body will come after you. From the Shepherd the Flock of God book, Secret Elder Stuff, chapter 12, page 79, sections 10 and 11, we get this. Under the subheading, Entering Marriage When Not Scripturally Free, if a baptized Christian remarries but was not scripturally free to do so, he is guilty of adultery, which would require judicial action. If the new marriage mate is baptized, she would also be dealt with judicially. Remarriage brings a scriptural end to the previous marriage. Forgiveness or rejection on the part of the innocent mate is no longer possible. It continues, quote, a Christian who married when not scripturally free would not qualify for special privileges of service in the congregation for many years, and not before living down any notoriety or reproach associated with his wrongdoing. This would include taking into consideration the current circumstances of the previous mate, who may have been dealt with treacherously, and any minor children who may have been abandoned by the guilty mate. Whether or not a Christian remarries, if he deliberately committed adultery in a scheming way so as to end his previous marriage, or he pressured his innocent mate to reject him so that she eventually agreed to a divorce, he has dealt treacherously with her. He would not qualify for special privileges for many years. End quote. I read this laughing because in 2 or 3 paragraphs from the Secret Elders book, you begin to see the loopholes. And you begin to see how people will use those loopholes to get to the conclusion they want. It's absolutely incredible. Love, marriage, and commitment are not based on motive or nuance. It's based on a set of rules, loopholes, and even things never said by anyone, including God's Son Jesus. The innocent mate actually has the right to forgive the mate who went and got naked with somebody and committed adultery. And if that guy rejects, no, I did this hoping you'd divorce me so I could marry the new girl, or vice versa, then they're disfellowshipped and the marriage is over. And let me tell you, people would work every angle on this to get out of an unhappy marriage. The experiences that immediately come to my mind. And aren't we glad to know that, service privileges and all, I'll get to that. This scheming to get out of a marriage you jumped into at 18 years old as a witness raised in this organization, I can't even begin to tell you now how much more common this is. How much more common. It has changed dramatically from when I was a little guy. People know the loopholes and they work them to get out of a marriage they typically got into in this organization as a teenager. And after a good month of having fun together, they realize, I don't even really like you. You're not even my best friend. And the problems begin. But here in the Secret Elder's Handbook, I have to point out, aren't we grateful to know that service privileges are getting addressed? Let me tell you, there are ways around that as well. I mean, a marriage has ended, kids may be involved, people are devastated for life. Divorce is devastating. It's devastating. Somebody could just be waylaid, just scarred for life. But these guys want to make sure that, by the way, we're not going to be able to make you an elder or pioneer anytime soon, so you kind of lost out on that. But let me tell you, there's ways around that as well, and I've seen it, and everyone knows it. For a guy, they're the only guys who get, quote, privileges for the most part. He can get those service privileges back a lot faster if he just moves congregations. Oftentimes semi-local, oftentimes states away. That clock on what he did, including adultery and divorce, is greatly reduced if he just moves away. Not as many people talk about it out there in his new home. It's also sloppy. And again, marriage and commitment is sacred. In Jehovah's Witnesses, well, until it isn't. We needed elders in this new congregation you moved to, so let's all just kind of forget what he did. On the West Coast, he's on the East Coast now, and him and his new wife, nobody really knows their backstory and how they destroyed another woman or vice versa. Let's move on. Let's make him an elder. Nobody knows about it. I saw this so many times. I know men that would actually strategically do this so they could be elders again after dumping a marriage mate. But if there's no physical cheating, because emotional cheating doesn't matter, never mind that either, and your marriage is miserable, what then? Within Jehovah's Witnesses, and it'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, some decide to separate. They separate. Since they can't divorce, no one has gotten naked with a third party or committed adultery. Make no mistake, some Jehovah's Witnesses plan to separate to expedite the ending they're actually really hoping for. One of these mates in this marriage loses their marbles and ends up in bed with someone. Now they can all get divorced and remarry. Loopholes. I saw separation initiated by both genders. This isn't just men or women. I saw them both do it. Separation pushes the emotional envelope for a Jehovah's Witness, including seeing each other sitting across the Kingdom Hall at meetings, looking at each other, and they're separated. They don't live together anymore. Other people in the congregation then get into the weird world of choosing sides between the man or the woman. The gossip mill is in full fire mode, and on it goes. I went through this in my own marriage, full disclosure, and looking back, it was so absurd. I was an elder over here. She left and went to a neighboring congregation that she actually knew was mad at me for not accepting their invitation to move there. They needed elders. And so she leveraged that in the gossip mill against me during a divorce. And so it began. Loopholes in what is supposed to be a sacred relationship dynamic known as marriage. But if you're not in the know, the governing body has a few things to say about separation as well. From the same FAQ section on their site, How do Jehovah's Witnesses view divorce? Under the subheading, How do Jehovah's Witnesses view separation? We get this from the 9 guys in New York, quote, the Bible encourages marriage mates to stay together even under less than ideal circumstances. Let me tell you what comes under that. Quick side note, that could include beatings. All laughter gone. I've seen it. Back to the quote, many problems can be resolved by just praying earnestly, applying Bible principles, and showing love. Nevertheless, this is still the quote, in extreme situations such as the following, some Christians have decided to separate from a marriage mate. The quote continues, here's the 3 reasons. 1, willful non-support, according to 1 Timothy 5:8. 2, extreme physical abuse, according to Psalms 11:5. 3, absolute endangerment of spiritual life. For example, a spouse might try to force a witness to break God's commands in some way, and the threatened mate might decide that a separation is the only way to obey God as ruler rather than men. End quote. We've learned that only getting naked or committing adultery with someone not your mate is the only reason you can divorce and remarry. But separation, as they teach us here in New York, from New York, has 2 or 3 reasons you can justify it. Here we go. And this is about to get interesting. Remember, your relationship is on the line. And at times, your life as a mate may be on the line. I think you know where I'm heading. But they have a lot to say about separation. Let's take these one by one. There are 3 reasons. Let's start at the top. They mention willful non-support. You're allowed to separate if you've basically been abandoned? Seems kind of inevitable by design, doesn't it? You've been abandoned, you've separated. We won't get into the logic. They don't use a lot of that in New York. But after all, thanks for giving us your blessing to keep breathing upon abandonment. Just insane. I personally never saw this happen. If someone has basically abandoned you, aren't you already basically separated? Never mind. You needed their blessing to say that it's okay to separate. And folks, I don't need to tell anyone that might listen to this crazy show that witnesses go right to the elders to get the endorsement, to tell them what to do, to tell them if it's okay to leave someone or separate from someone that's just abandoned them, doesn't support them anymore, as if logic doesn't kick in. Probably deserves its own show. It's so stupid. The second reason, and one that I'm probably going to get a little hot on, you notice that they said the second reason was extreme physical abuse. Buckle up. I'm not going to be kind here, because this one I did deal with as an elder. From the Watchtower of 1988, November 1st, pages 20 through 25, When Marital Peace is Threatened, says this, quote, extreme physical abuse is another basis for separation. Supposing an unbelieving mate, has to be unbelieving, couldn't be believing, right? Often gets drunk, becomes enraged, and causes the believer physical harm. Through prayer and by displaying the fruitage of Jehovah's Spirit, the believer may be able to prevent such outbursts and make the situation endurable. But if the point is reached where the health and life of the abused mate actually are in jeopardy, separation would be allowable scripturally. End quote. This guy's going to take a deep breath. First, in what world outside the spiritual paradise of Jehovah's Witnesses does physical abuse have to be what's called extreme for you to feel okay to leave? Do you see what the governing body did there? They're literally shaming the victim and creating an environment where they question their own abuse that they're enduring. Things like, oh, he smacked me around. Was that enough to be extreme? He just threw me against the wall, but he didn't beat me. Or she only slapped me once or twice. Is that extreme? I could keep going, but I'm pretty sure anyone listening gets the point. Getting serious for a moment, I saw this one more than once. It's sickening. People justifying physical and emotional danger and abuse because of quotes like this from God's guys. It has to be extreme. And I'll wait here for someone to show me where this was commented on in the Bible or by Jesus himself. Trust me, I did the work for everyone. I looked. As an elder, nothing. Zero. They quote Psalms 11:5 in this little piece on extreme physical abuse, where it only states that Jehovah hates violence. But, only if it's extreme? Can we get a graph from the heavens that shows us what constitutes extreme abuse versus, I don't know, run-of-the-mill physical abuse? Is there a difference? The level of absurdity in this could be the subject of jokes, but let's get right to the point. It isn't funny, and especially if you've witnessed it. I've seen sisters whose faces weren't recognizable. What? They're not free to divorce or remarry. Truth. I've seen sisters stay with guys that would just, it wasn't extreme. This puts people in danger, deadly danger. And if you think, and you're a Jehovah's Witness who's bravely listening, thanks for being here, that this has changed, think again. It goes both ways, but for the most part, the sisters can be in very serious danger, believing in their hearts that they're being loyal to Jehovah because his 9 guys in upstate New York encouraged her to stay. Just say a few more prayers, or maybe, get busy on those fruits of the Spirit. Maybe you need some work on those. Maybe that's what's causing him to be, I don't know, minor physical abuse versus extreme. And of course, we all know abuse tends to escalate over time. I don't need to say it, people, but some have been killed staying in a sacred marriage and not deciding to separate because, and I can't hover here too long, it's so disgusting, these guys told them they should. But remember, loopholes. You can separate, but you can never divorce this person. That's right, you're stuck with this person no matter what. And for a woman in most cases, the financial piece, the children, all of this weighs so heavily on her that she stays. Even if she does decide to leave and move on to save her life, she's still married. And also, by doctrines in this paradise, this spiritual paradise, she's taught she gets to live alone forever, even post-abuse. Take a breath, podcast host. In reality, the elders will actually encourage a reconciliation. They'll encourage it. Even when someone has been physically harmed, and I'm not going to get into some imaginary graph like they tried to do, where it's, quote, extreme versus what, non-extreme? Does abuse come with tears? Is one punch cool? 2 is too many? I saw sisters living in fear, but they stayed married because this organization encouraged them to. Because after all, someone didn't get naked. They can't divorce them. And yeah, look, sister, you can't separate. We're going to give you the out. We mention it. We can't back it up with scripture, but we're going to give you the out. But some don't take it, folks. They don't take the out. And this guy was a hothead. I know that shocks everybody, but even as an elder. And I tell you what, I gave more than a few death stares across a kingdom hall at guys I knew what was up. I knew what was up. I got counsel on it. Some of these women wouldn't leave. This is one of the most unnerving things I witnessed in my time as a witness, particularly as an elder. I promise you, in most cases as a young adult, that make these people now tied to a forever, which sounds an awful lot like a child baptism, doesn't it? That people were in pain. It's all the same with Jehovah's Witnesses. It's all the same. They got you. We got you. And we're not going to let you go, including in your most intimate relationships. We make the rules. We tell you what you can and can't do. Imagine what sort of mind comes up with tears of abuse and then has the balls to share it on their website. Thanks for protecting Jehovah's precious sheep, guys. Next time I face abuse in my home, I'll be sure to pray more to discern if it was extreme enough for Jehovah. I'll just ignore the word abuse on any level until it's really bad abuse, okay? I'll stop there. That was number 2 on what allows a Jehovah's Witness to separate. How about number 3? Just keeps getting more interesting. Number 3 was absolute endangerment of spiritual life. For example, a spouse might try to force a witness to break God's commands in some way, and the threatened mate might decide that a separation is the only way to obey God as ruler rather than men. Gotta take another deep breath. Folks, in a world where there's ever-changing new light, this particular one, endangerment of spiritual life, was also used to break up marriages in the 70s and 80s for people that were in marriages where one or both of the mates wanted to have oral sex. They'd say, the governing body says that's a disfellowshipping offense. It's in print. Look it up. I'm now spiritually endangered. I'm going to leave my mate. Not kidding. That's but one example, because, sex rules in this organization. That's just one crazy, insane example. My wife or husband wants oral or anal sex. I'm going to end the marriage and at the very least separate. Last comment, 1983, May. Watchtower, look it up. Dealt with it. Loopholes. I'm going to take a deep breath for so many reasons, though, on this subject of spiritual endangerment as a basis for separation. They aren't saying your husband or wife is encouraging you to miss a few meetings or fudge a little bit on your time slip. Oh no, they're referring to disobeying the governing body. That's it. First, I saw sisters leveraging this one more than once to get out of an unhappy marriage. I'll tell stories. Second, nowhere in the Bible does it say you can leave your spouse if they no longer believe Jesus was on an extended vacation until 1919 when he suddenly chose a publishing company and decided that they were the best guys on earth to speak for him. Third, yes, it takes extreme abuse for someone to leave a dangerous situation and have these guys' blessing. But in this case, all you have to do is say, hey, generations don't actually overlap. What are you talking about? And that mate that wants out of this marriage has their get out of jail free card. You just disagreed with the governing body. Oh yes, your intimate relationship in marriage is under their watchful eye to be sure that you always agree with them, even in private. If you disagree, your mate can separate from you. The Watchtower of 1988, November 1st, pages 20 through 25, already touched on this one, back to it, where marital peace is threatened. It says this, quote, "Yet, what if a very unhealthy spiritual state exists, where both mates are believers? The elders should render assistance, but especially should the baptized husband work diligently to remedy the situation. Of course, if a baptized marriage partner acts like an apostate and tries to prevent his mate from serving Jehovah, the elders should handle matters according to the scriptures." End quote. So much to say here. So much to say. Acting like an apostate, trying to get you to be an apostate, never saw it. And I've seen one or two mates decide they didn't believe the governing body anymore, but they never told the other person they couldn't. It's okay, they separated anyway. Second, did you note that the elders and the organization are inside your marriage? The organization, your local congregation, has the right to insert themselves. The elders should handle matters according to the scriptures. What is it? There's no scripture on it. This guy doesn't believe in overlapping generations. His wife does. She now has the right to leave him. And they'll help her. And I saw this. And exactly what is the elders supposed to do here? This guy figured out that blood fractions are absurd. that the generation of 1914 is all dead now. The elders better take action. By the way, sister, you can separate from him now if you like, and we will still bless you. The elders and the organization are part of your marriage. They always find a way to exert their control over your life, whether it's your dreams, your very thoughts, the blood that runs in your veins, and of course your marriage. This isn't a relationship between two people who adore each other. This is a relationship with two Jehovah's Witnesses. Therefore, they have the authority. Don't ignore this, Jehovah's Witnesses. Please. And this reference on the website literally ends right there with the 3 reasons. No explanation beyond this paragraph. The point is made clear. You can separate and have our blessing if your mate doesn't agree with us. You're free to go. You can't marry. You can't remarry. But let me tell you, when one mate leaves, what usually happens is the other mate makes a boo-boo. They run out, they're lonely, they end up finding companionship, and then the mate who left them, never realizing that they endangered this, and they pushed them, even though they didn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness, but they were okay if the wife stayed a Jehovah's Witness, they were okay if the other party did. They had the right to separate because they didn't agree with 9 jackasses in New York, and the marriage is now over. Where do I begin? If you're a witness listening to this, and like most of us, we've left, thank God, thank whatever, actually, Freudian slip, where do you even begin? Because friends, I have stories. This is the one many Jehovah's Witnesses are now, in 2023, leaning into to dump or separate, which leads to divorce, it's inevitable, unhappy marriages. Sure, there are times that people just go out and cheat and pray that the innocent mate doesn't forgive them. I'll get into that down the road maybe. But many are now leaning into their obsession with apostasy to break up an unhappy marriage. And I'm going to give you some examples I experienced as an elder and then shortly after I left. Here's one. As an elder, we had a sister who, for whatever reason, decided I was going to be one of her top confidants. I knew her husband well as well. We had a sister leave her husband on the recommendation of the then presiding overseer, who happened to also be my closest friend on our body of elders. I was stunned that he encouraged this, and I told him so, even if he only lightly suggested it was an option for her. That's what elders do, to make sure they say, well, I never told her she could, I just told her it was an option. This sister's husband was a former Bethelite, special pioneer, a ministerial servant, who knew for years that the organization was all smoke and mirrors. He had lived at Bethel. They had 2 adult kids. He decided to bail and stop going to meetings, didn't tell her she had to. She saw this as a way out of the marriage. She came to the body of elders crying and was encouraged to leave him on the basis of, you got it, spiritual endangerment. Folks, he was perfectly okay with her continuing as a J-dub. But she wanted out of the marriage, and here was her chance. Both adult kids bailed on the organization. She stayed in the organization without any hope of remarrying. BS, she knew it would end somehow. But she knew the clock was ticking, and he would move on with his life. And she went on a very overt and public hunt for a husband. She was flirting with brothers, some of them even married, and eventually, you guessed it, she got her wish. After abandoning her husband, who just didn't want to be a witness anymore because he no longer believed in it, she was able to use this spiritual endangerment tag, found nowhere in the Bible, that the governing body have rolled out to their people as a reason to separate. As an elder during this time period, I scolded my friend, the PO. I looked high and low to find any biblical reasoning for this, and guess what? I couldn't. As I mentioned, she even got the blessing of this person, this friend of mine, the PO. Marriage over, no repercussions. She would have been encouraged to stay with her husband if he was beating her up. But because he disagreed with the guys in New York, their marriage, all the memories, the children, the future grandchildren, none of it mattered. None of it mattered. She was able to do this because her husband in this case did not agree with the 9 guys in New York. Marriage is so sacred though, right? How about a second story? I'm in a story mood. A close friend had, in my opinion, what was one of the best relationships I've ever seen to this day, anywhere. When he started to look into the organization, studying, and began having doubts, he shared it with his wife. She was quick to want a divorce. This one makes me so sick to my stomach because they were a wonderful couple, best friends. They were such close, great people. But it was over because he no longer believed in overlapping generations. She separated and she just waited. She waited for what a man in his 40s would do, which was find another woman to spend time with. Eventually it happened. She had her divorce. Because Jehovah is always kicking back, waiting for loopholes to appear within his organization, making whatever happens next perfectly okay, and the elders will bless it. Motive, desire, premeditated thought be damned. We got a loophole and a way out of this unhappy marriage. A marriage that in these two's case was very happy, and I actually admired their marriage. But he didn't want to be a witness. She did. She had her ticket out. Folks, not taught anywhere in the Bible. This is completely fabricated by the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Heck, in a long rambling episode, I've got a third story. There was a very prominent elder in our circuit. He was a big shot elder. Big shot. Everybody knows his name. He was a big shot elder. He was on every convention. He ran numerous departments. The circuit overseers, the district overseers, they all loved him. He had dumped his first wife and a son. And I don't truly know all the details, but I understood it didn't include the wife getting naked with someone else. But at one point, I was a guest speaker in a congregation, and literally, as I left the stage, after giving the final prayer following the Watchtower study, that's what the guest speaker does, she stopped me on the steps coming off the stage and began to unload story after story to me. I did not know her. In tears, of how this prominent elder had been physically abusing her for years, and how no one would listen to her because of his fame. The elders were saying that she was a nut job to her face, and she continues on with the stories of how this big shot elder had been abusing her, and eventually it led to divorce. I approached the elders on my way out and kindly told them what happened. Look, that sister over there, very distressed. And, she told me about this elder. I was about to say his name. I'm glad I didn't. Who we all knew. He was extremely famous in the area. And they literally rolled their eyes and said, she's a nut job. She's crazy. Don't even listen to her. Thanks for coming. Great talk. I walked out of there going, I wonder what the truth is. The little guy was in the middle. Their son. She was claiming to be battered, and he was rolling out the symposiums at the district convention. I have no idea what the truth was, but wow, was she oddly passionate, desperate, and crying when she approached me. And stories like this are all too common in matters of marriage, separation, divorce among Jehovah's Witnesses. But a final couple of words on witnesses in this situation known as separation. Even in separation, it generally all comes down to sex. It's always about sex. Sex or apostasy. The theme is there. That's right. Throw everything else out. The faithful and discreet slave discourage separation. And aside from the things I just mentioned that justify it, those 3 things, you really shouldn't separate because, well, it comes down to sex again. Sex and stuff. That Watchtower, November 1st, 1988, 26 through 30, Has God Called You to Peace, says this, quote, scripturally allowable separation or divorce will solve some problems, but such steps basically result in trading one set of problems for another. For instance, one divorced Christian said, I can't help thanking Jehovah that I now have peace. But she admitted it's not easy raising children as one parent, and sometimes one can get very lonely and depressed. Even sexually, it's not easy. One has yet to adjust to a whole different life. End quote. Paul wrote, quote, if she should actually depart, let her remain unmarried or else make up again with her husband. With some effort, it may be possible for a woman to make up with her husband or be reconciled to him. If Christian mates have separated, then they should give reconciliation very serious, prayerful thought. Moreover, they should not ignore the fact that sexual impulses may pose a danger. How is God likely to view them if their failure to become reconciled should result in a fall into immorality? Illustrating this danger is the experience of a certain baptized woman. You notice the women get a lot of blame. Quote, after a divorce, she began dating a worldly man, soon became pregnant, and was disfellowshipped. Although she was later reinstated, her experience emphasizes the need for caution and prayerful reliance on Jehovah so as to avoid sinning against God. It is also obvious that emotional and sexual needs should not be minimized when separation or divorce is initially considered. End quote. Sex and loopholes. They know where this is going if you separate. One of you, if not both of you, is going to get lonely and want companionship, and part of companionship is touching each other. And I always laughed at these experiences. It doesn't seem to mention the guys at all. It mentions the sisters. The sisters blew it. They separated. She should have stayed if it wasn't extreme physical abuse, because, either her or her husband are going to get horny and someone is going to break up this marriage. And then it's kind of on her now, isn't it? Because she left to save her life and didn't have grounds. Let that sit in your head. It's incredible. They never seem to mention the guy in this relationship. The experiences are always the sisters choking because it was their decision to separate. So, you drove the guy. You drove the guy into the arms of another woman. He was beating me. Yeah, but was it extreme beatings? I mean, you could have prayed more, right? And of course, in these experiences, they never mention that the woman married a really nice guy and they raised this child together, even though she got his fellowship and she had a great marriage. That never gets mentioned. Never does it seem to dawn on any of these people that many Jehovah's Witnesses separate hoping and praying the other person caves, gets naked with someone and frees them up to marry that person they've been checking out for years in their congregation. I mentioned a story. And you can't help but notice that separation and divorce is almost always sold to Jehovah's Witnesses from the woman's perspective. She's going to be lonely. She's going to be broke. She's going to be horny with nowhere to go. But the guy, the brother, not so much. We forgot about him. And let me tell you, I've seen elders cheat on their wives to get free of a miserable marriage. And they're back in the congregation or organization today, hanging out with all of their old friends as if nothing happened. Names are coming to mind. The woman in the broken marriage, let me tell you something. Tragically, she's oftentimes still alone. It's sickening. And in this case, it truly does play into Jehovah's words in Malachi about dealing treacherously with your wives. It happens all the time. There are 3-to-1 sisters in this organization versus brothers, and an older guy in his 30s, 40s, 50s can start to develop eyes for a beautiful girl in her 20s, 30s, and it's game on, folks. Because, loopholes and stuff. Ugh. Shifting gears. What happens when you're married to a non-Jehovah's Witness in this spiritual paradise and organization? I would be remiss if we didn't discuss the often bizarre world of unbelieving mates. That is the term given to a man or woman who is married to a Jehovah's Witness but isn't a baptized witness themselves. Ah, yes, you may have met, fallen in love, spent years in wedded bliss, but now one of you is a witness, and guess what? that marriage now falls under the scrutiny of the local body of elders and their overlords, the governing body. As you might imagine, there are rules to follow even in this situation as well. Here's some examples. Again, one of these guys, the man or the woman, usually a guy, aren't even witnesses, but somehow the elders have a right to... What? Okay. First, I have to add that some of the nicest people I've ever encountered anywhere were unbelieving husbands married to Jehovah's Witness sisters. Some of the best dudes I ever met. I used to marvel at their kindness and the love for their wives, and undoubtedly, this is one of the reasons those sisters may have married them to begin with, right? Either before becoming a witness, or maybe after, or maybe it was adultery. And yes, I knew of sisters that cheated on their husbands with a non-believer, got disfellowshipped, sat at the back of the Kingdom Hall for a year, then came back married to the non-believer. But the guys they married, look, such nice men, good guys. They would even support the wife by coming to the Kingdom Hall. Some of them were absolutely brilliant, educated men I might add. And I could see them during meetings literally rolling their eyes, listening to the garbage coming from the stage. I'd sometimes watch them to see their reactions. Imagine these great guys marrying a witness sister. Imagine signing up for this crap. I got to tell you, in my mind, that's true love. They didn't agree with it. They had no intention of ever being a witness, but God, did they love her? And it was okay if she wanted to be. They'd go humor her. But they'd sit there just like, what did they just say? Some of them were Bible scholars. 2 men come to mind immediately. But I couldn't help but think about it from another perspective. Even as an elder watching some of these great guys, imagine the world these unbelieving spouses were thrust into. I befriended a couple of these guys, and their patience was legendary. They give up their wives to a publishing company at that time 3 nights a week, and then throw in preaching on the weekends. Imagine their family life where your wife is righteous and you're a pagan. She doesn't celebrate any holidays or birthdays with you or your extended family. Oh boy. Talk about stressful conversations, not the least of which may include, why did you marry someone in a cult? From his family. Do I need to even say it? But imagine her wanting to be real conservative in the bedroom with a 0 oral expression, but he's very used to lots of oral expression, and she now thinks it's evil, and he's married to her. And then there were the kids involved, and how all of this impacted them, raising them in a divided household, so to speak. And of course, these spouses that weren't witnesses then became the lowest hanging fruit for people to invite to have a Bible study and to push to getting baptized to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. It truly all resembled to me a really low-life MLM scam. I marveled at these guys. They really loved these women. They weren't witnesses, but the woman was. They were okay with that. They'd put up with it. But think about what they put up with. Their lives were forever altered by marrying a Jehovah's Witness. But finally, in these guys' cases, there was what I think is the most obvious, mind-blowing piece of this whole thing. His wife's a witness, he's not. What that means is, he, despite all his character and all his love and all his loyalty, he was a dead man walking. It didn't matter how nice he was or how loyal he was to his marriage and this beautiful sister. It didn't matter. Every time he agreed to go to the Kingdom Hall with his wife, he heard from the stage that he would soon be bird food unless he became a Jehovah's Witness. His kids would be bird food if they didn't become a Jehovah's Witness. These people were so in love with their spouse that they were willing to sit and listen to this stuff and dance around a belief system that made their spouse look like a nut job to their entire extended family. And listen, if a witness and their unbelieving mate go through a rough patch and something serious happens, you guessed it, not seen nearly as serious if the dub ditches that unbeliever now. After all, they're worldly, and they're marked for a fireball anyway. Let that stuff sink in. Unbelieving mates are some of the most strong, high character, unbelievable people I've ever met in my time as a witness. Because no one thinks about what their world now includes. It's true insanity. And let me say it right here and now, it's true love. He must really, really love her. It's incredible. But the JW spouse is encouraged to, you guess it, get that unbeliever into a baptism pool. And they're blatant about it. From the Watchtower of 95, October 1st, pages 8 through 13, does God come first in your family? We get this, quote, the scriptures reveal that husbands and wives who steadfastly uphold Bible truth can contribute to saving their non-Christian mates by helping them become believers, end quote. Oh my goodness, you can lay in bed at night as a witness, married to a non-witness, and you can count your time. You're in field service every minute of every day in your marriage. Count those hours. This fact alone makes every interaction, greeting at the Kingdom Hall, invitation to the congregation get-together, all of it, for this unbelieving mate, come with all kinds of ulterior motives. And most of them know it. Isn't that warm and fuzzy? I would talk to the unbelievers with lots of eye rolls and things like, dude, I'm never going to be a witness, but I love my wife. End of story. But that wife, her top householder, was the guy she was married to. An unbelievable dynamic that most people never ever think of when it comes to being married to a witness when you're not a witness. And again, the elders and organization have the right to stick their foot right in that marriage, even though you're the man of the house and you ain't one of us. We have barely scratched the surface of all things marriage, separation, divorce, and more in this long, rambling episode. But I can't sign off without sharing at least one of my, or several of my, deep thoughts that only grew over decades of being a witness. Are you ready for the rambling brain benders of myself? From Insight on the Scriptures Under Marriage, it says this, quote, the union of a man and a woman as husband and wife according to the standards set out by God. Marriage is a divine institution, authorized and established by Jehovah in Eden. Marriage brings into being the family unit, the family circle. Its basic purpose was the reproducing of the members of the human family to bring into existence more creatures of all humankind. So romantic. Jehovah the Creator made male and female and ordained marriage as the proper arrangement for the multiplication of the human race. The first human wedding was performed by Jehovah, as described in Genesis 2, 22 through 24, end quote. Insight book, Under Marriage. Got it. However, aside from the fact that you want us making babies so there'll be more people to praise you, an odd dynamic worth its own subject matter, not a lot else here to go on. God didn't want anyone to be alone, which of course makes the modern day shunning practices of the witnesses seem a little strange. But aside from that, he created an arrangement called marriage. And might I add that that arrangement failed rather quickly. Despite what Jehovah's Witnesses tell us today, most of what they say allows for a separation or divorce isn't taught anywhere in the Bible. We get it from a group of guys in upstate New York. Truth. Undeniable. And here it is. I always thought that some of the stuff on marriage, separation, and what should be a very private, intimate relationship was all really strange. A few observations. First, Jehovah's most important arrangement on day one of mankind almost immediately implodes. And the only thing he does to help their marriage is give them some animal skins so they can cover their junk. He openly blames the woman for everything, then blames the guy for listening to the woman. There's nobody else around. Some really awesome marriage counseling to kick off this whole human race thing, isn't it? What? Then he rolls out the Mosaic Law, which encourages slavery of females and allows the guys to have several wives and concubines, including the guys he installs as kings, the precursor to the governing body of today. And then, by weird extension, even allows people to divorce. You can have lots of wives, you can have some concubines you're not married to so I can get some babies, and you can divorce them. See Moses, he's got the details. Then, later on, his son visits, and he wants everyone to go back to the Garden of Eden story and only marry one person, supporting his father's view that it isn't good for a man or a woman to be alone. He then throws down the gauntlet and says, getting naked with someone other than their mate makes both of them free to marry other people, but then strongly suggests, forgive him anyway, maybe it'll work out. Jesus, himself single, then rolls up on a guy like the Apostle Paul, blinds him, and gives him more wisdom. Did I mention Jesus was single? The Apostle Paul also was never married and single, and gives him a whole bunch of more stuff to say about relationships that seem to conflict with Jehovah's comment in the Garden of Eden, where he bluntly says, it isn't good for a man to be alone. So he makes this gorgeous creature called woman. But Paul, with Jesus' help, we're told, he says, to what Jehovah says. And he has a lot to say about women in particular, because Jesus apparently forgot to mention this stuff when he was here. And most of what the single guy Paul has to say resembles a lot of stuff Jesus abolished a few years earlier in the Mosaic Law. And well, it's so surprising to see a former Pharisee have such strong opinions on human relationships. See 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where Mr. Warm and Fuzzy himself is openly encouraging people to stay single, including widows, and that mates have no say over their own bodies. Their mate calls the shots on what they can do to their body. And again, going back to the beginning, Jehovah says, I don't want anyone to be alone. But Paul says, hey, it's a really good idea to be alone. And they're on the same team. And I am stinking confused. What? Wait, do you guys talk to each other in heaven? And to wind it up, I looked and looked, but couldn't find where he then told 9 guys in New York about 3 additional potential outs if they wanted to separate that we got earlier. You remember spiritual endangerment, only extreme abuse, somebody ditching you with your money. There's no mention of any of these in the Bible. Not by Jehovah, not by Jesus, not by the Apostle Paul. I looked. In conclusion, all of this just creates more questions in my mind. Maybe I'm alone. Things like this, all these loopholes, all these things, is how Jehovah feels about 2 people's intimate commitment to each other? Really? Because if it does, it really just doesn't say much about his divine institution of marriage. But we can't conclude without an oldie but a goodie. The one scripture that the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses have plastered in every wedding outline and remind every couple in every talk and their family life publications every chance they get. You'll remember it. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 12. Say it with me. Quote, and someone may overpower one alone, but 2 together can take a stand against him. And a threefold cord cannot quickly be torn apart. End quote. When it comes to your relationships, your marriage, You have to have that threefold cord if you're going to make it. And when you're God's mouthpiece on earth, allegedly, your marriage isn't yours. It includes them. Thanks for listening in this week. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Wherever you may be well.